We will look at all options in terms of how we would respond if they do come into effect. That's part of what we'll be discussing with premiers. As many of you know, yesterday the United States announced the intention in 30 days, to launch the latest, what is a series of trade actions against Canada in violation of our agreement, CUSMA, with the United States and Mexico. And I want to put this in a bit of perspective, then answer a couple questions. The first is that in response to these actions, this began over 18 months ago, Canadians from coast to coast to coast have stood together. The federal government, provincial government, Labour, business, Canadians themselves, uniting, focusing on what we can control, building strength here at home, supporting each other, buying Canadian, and diversifying partnerships abroad. We've signed more than 20 economic and security partnerships internationally.
Canada is refusing to back down after Mark Carney accused the United States of breaking its own trade promises. As talks continue behind the scenes, Canada is preparing to defend its economy in ways that could shift the pressure back where it started. And that could end up being very bad for the U.S. Prime Minister Mark Carney confirmed that he had spoken directly with Donald Trump one day after the American president signed proclamations imposing 50% tariffs on a broad range of Canadian goods. The two leaders agreed to intensify trade negotiations. Carney's public characterization of the tariffs themselves did not soften. They are a direct violation of CUSMA and the latest in a series of unilateral American actions that began with tariffs the United States imposed in breach of the agreement its own president negotiated during his first term. The tariffs Trump signed on July 20th cover wine, dairy products, cement, furniture, ice hockey equipment, and motor vehicle components at a 50% rate. Energy, potash, critical minerals, and fish received temporary exemptions, a carve-out that reflects the specific American supply dependencies in those four categories rather than any diplomatic concession. The measures take effect 30 days from signing. That 30-day window is the negotiating period both leaders committed to using when they spoke on July 21st. The American justification for the July 20th proclamations cited discrimination against U.S. commerce in three specific sectors: automobiles, alcoholic beverages, and dairy. Each of those grievances has a documented Canadian counterposition. On automobiles, Canada's counter tariffs on American vehicles were imposed in direct response to the 25% Section 232 automotive tariffs Washington applied to Canadian-assembled vehicles first. On alcohol, provincial liquor board restrictions on American products were implemented after the original February 2025 tariffs took effect, and Canadian provinces have consistently stated those restrictions will be lifted when American tariffs are removed. On dairy, Canada's supply management system operates within the tariff rate quota framework that CUSMA itself established, and Bill C-202, passed by Parliament in 2025, legally prevents Canadian negotiators from offering additional supply management concessions in any trade agreement. Canada has made a series of detailed and comprehensive proposals to resolve this dispute and to modernize CUSMA. We stand ready to intensify those discussions in the coming weeks, Carney said in his formal statement responding to the tariffs. The legal characterization Carney applied to the July 20th measures is the foundation of Canada's position in any dispute settlement proceeding that follows. His statement described the tariffs as the latest in a series of unilateral U.S. trade actions that began with the U.S. imposing a series of tariffs in direct violation of the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement. That framing treats the entire sequence since February 2025, the IEEPA tariffs, the Section 232 steel and aluminum measures, the automotive tariffs, the lumber duties, and now the July 20th proclamations as one continuous violation, rather than as separate policy decisions requiring separate legal challenges. Canada has already challenged the Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs at the World Trade Organization and under CUSMA's dispute settlement mechanism. The July 20th measures add to an existing legal track. Carney also stated that Canada's own counter-tariff measures were legally justified responses designed to protect Canadian industries, a position that directly contradicts the American framing of Canadian retaliation as the source of the dispute. Under both WTO rules and CUSMA's own provisions, a country facing tariffs that violate an agreement is permitted to impose proportionate countermeasures. Canada's position is that its counter-tariffs are the lawful response to an initial violation, not an independent trade barrier requiring correction. Washington's position, as reflected in the July 20th proclamations, treats those same counter-tariffs as discrimination against American commerce. The legal authority underpinning the July 20th tariffs is different from the authority Washington used for its earlier measures. The U.S. Supreme Court struck down the IEEPA Emergency Tariff Authority earlier in 2026, forcing the administration to identify alternative statutory mechanisms for imposing trade measures it could no longer ground in emergency powers. The July 20th proclamations use different legal instruments, a shift with direct implications for both the durability of the tariffs and the specific grounds on which Canada can challenge them. A tariff imposed under contested statutory authority carries litigation risk for the imposing government that an unambiguous authority would not. Canada's premiers responded to the July 20th announcement at the Council of the Federation meeting in Prince Edward Island the following day. Ontario Premier Doug Ford confirmed Ontario would not lift its ban on American alcohol products, stating, "We can't keep rolling over." Other premiers pushed back against the American alcohol grievance, specifically noting that provincial liquor boards are provincial government institutions operating within provincial jurisdiction, and that their purchasing decisions are domestic policy rather than trade barriers subject to international negotiation. The premier's unified position on the alcohol restrictions removed one potential concession from the negotiating table before the intensified talks began. The wildfire dimension that preceded the tariff announcement by 3 days added an additional layer to the bilateral tension. On July 17th, Trump posted on Truth Social, accusing Canada of willful negligence in forest management and threatening to add wildfire smoke pollution costs to existing tariffs. The July 20th proclamations, when they arrived, cited trade grievances in automotive, alcohol, and dairy sectors, rather than environmental concerns, meaning the wildfire threat and the actual tariff action were legally separate, even though they occurred within the same 72-hour window and were widely reported. Together, Carney has cited more than 20 new economic and security partnerships Canada has signed since March 2025 as evidence of the country's commitment to trade with partners beyond the United States. Those partnerships include the Germany Critical Minerals Agreement, the Kessie Lysoms LNG deal with Germany's CEF, the Japan Critical Minerals Stockpiling Discussions, the Saudi Arabia Commercial Agreements, the Denmark Arctic Security Cooperation Framework, the Australia Radar Contract, and the Germany Submarine Procurement. Each was concluded while the American trade dispute was escalating. The 20-plus figure is cited specifically to establish that Canada's economic diversification has proceeded independently of the American negotiating track. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce described the July 20th tariffs as a regrettable escalation and called on both governments to use the 30-day implementation window to advance negotiations toward a resolution. Flavio Volpe of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association told CBC's Power and Politics that Canada should not panic over the new tariffs, describing them as a likely negotiating tactic given the pattern the Trump administration has established throughout the bilateral conflict: announce a measure, create pressure, provide an implementation delay, and observe what the other side brings to the negotiating table before the deadline arrives. The intensified negotiations Carney and Trump agreed to on July 21st now run against a 29-day clock. Canada's negotiating position entering that window includes documented, comprehensive proposals already submitted, provincial alcohol restrictions that the premiers have publicly refused to lift, supply management concessions that Canadian law prohibits negotiators from offering, and counter-tariffs on American steel and aluminum that remain in force.